welcome everyone to the Cabinet meeting of Vale Horse District Council meeting here in Abbey House on today, the 27th of September 2024. I'd like to thank all of you coming, both in person and online, and we can start by getting on with the agenda. Now we just have a short announcement about the arrangements for broadcasting. Can you let us know?
So we aren't broadcasting live this morning, but this will be uploaded after the meeting to our YouTube channel.
Are there any other announcements? There are no other announcements. So we go on to item number 2, apologies for absence. Now, we have a few people appearing online. So we do a roll call.
So if you could confirm if you are attending online or present in the room. Councillor Bethia Thomas.
Present in the room.
Councillor Mark Coleman.
Present in the room.
Councillor Sue Call.
Present online.
Andy Crawford.
Present in the room.
Councillor Lucy Edwards. Present in the room. Councillor Neil Fawcett. I haven't seen him online yet.
I haven't seen him. He did say that he was going to try and attend online. He had previously sent his apologies, but he said he would, so he might be a bit late.
Councillor Diana Lagova.
Attending online.
And Councillor Helen Pickles.
I'm present in the room.
Councillor Andy Fulsham.
Present in the room.
Thank you very much. And hopefully Neil will be able to join us soon. Item number 3, the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? Does anybody have any comments? Free to note those minutes. Thank you. Item number 4, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any pecuniary interest or otherwise that they need to declare at this stage?
Just to remind everybody that I say the farm when it comes to the next material item.
Thank you. Have you noted that?
Yes,
Thank you very much. Item number 5, urgent business. I don't believe there's any urgent business, but you do have the just the
fire regulation. Yes. So in the event of a fire alarm, there is no planned testing today. If you could leave through the nearest fire exit, which is to the right of the meeting room, and assemble by meeting point 9.
Thank you very much. And I've just noticed that Councillor Fawcett is now online. Thank you. So we go on to item number 6, public participation. We do have a few members who have registered to speak today. I'm not sure if Councillor Gascoigne is here yet.
See her yet? Oh, yes, she is. Yes, sorry, Chair. She is.
Which Councillor Gascoigne, would you like to address us first? We have a few people, but the time allotted to this section is about 15 minutes, so we'd be happy for you to address us, but keep in mind of that timing. Thank you.
Me to go first. Okay, so I'm here as chair of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee, and on your agenda today you will see some items regarding net zero targets that our committee discussed back in July, so a couple of months ago now that we had this. So I'm trying to cast my mind back to when we had that discussion, and you will of course read the papers and they will be presented to you later in the meeting. But the gist is that the targets have been reviewed, and we were looking particularly at the interim targets for both of our the council's own operations, so the operational net zero, but also the net zero target in regard to the whole district. So that's everything that happens in the district. So just to remind members, but also those that maybe weren't here back when we first set these targets. So we set these targets in SEAC back. I was a member back then, and we had Councillor Grant as our chair. And we set these targets, but we set them in the absence of data. So Climate Emergency Advisory Committee had just started up. We wanted to set targets to show our intention, but we didn't have, we didn't have all the officers working on it. None of some of the reports that have now come out, such as PASCO and so on, none of that had happened. So we just wanted to set targets. So I think it's important to say that, because that is the context as to why we're having to look at these now. And I don't personally view it as a failure that you will see in the papers that we won't meet our interim targets. And that is because when we set them, we weren't basing it on anything. So where we are today is that data has been looked at, and it is felt that it is known that we won't meet our interim targets. So there's a lot of discussion in Climate Emergency Advisory Committee in July about this and what it means for our reputation if we remove them entirely, or if we keep going with it even though we know we can't make it. It's a very tricky topic. So I would just say that the general gist of our recommendations was that we definitely affirm our commitment to the overall target, but in terms of the interim, what we would like to see is a revision. So looking at the data we have, using the information to set realistic interim targets based on what we now know. And it is not a failure that we were unable to meet interim targets that we set in the absence of this data. It's important to keep track of what we're doing. So we would like to see sort of annual reporting of the data. And we think that the targets are important because it allows us to keep pushing, keep lobbying government to bring in legislation that helps us meet the targets, but also work with our partners, because it is with partnership working that we will meet these targets, and we can't hope to do that without it. And that's why we do think it is important to set realistic interim targets. Conscious that there are other people to speak, so I'll leave it there. And if you have any questions, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Hayley, Councillor Gascoigne. We really do appreciate you coming along as Chair of SEAC to address this. And obviously it is a very important issue for us all to consider. And I really appreciate how you've given us the historical, sounds a bit over dramatic, but the historical context in which we set these targets initially, because that does help understand why we may not have got to where we were desiring to be at that point. So I do appreciate that. Does anybody have any further questions, Councillor Gascoigne? No. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks.
No problem.
Have a good day. We have
James.
yes, thank you. So Councillor James, are you present? Hello. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you. But I'm also here to talk about items 9 and 10 on the agenda, the council operations and district carbon emissions targets. And I'd like to start by congratulating Cabinet and the Lib Dem administration for making climate change a high priority in the current corporate plan. And this is a priority, of course, that's very much shared by myself and my fellow Green councillors. In the report on our council emissions, I think there's a huge amount to be proud of. A lot of work has been done. There's good information now on where operational emissions come from and how we can reduce them, and that work is well underway. The report on the district emissions highlights our collaboration with other Oxfordshire councils through the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan. However, it's also clear, as Councillor Gascoigne was just speaking about, that we're not going to hit our current interim targets for our own operations or for the district. And these aimed to front load our carbon emissions reductions. And there's really good scientific reasons for front loading carbon emission reductions, because in the end it is the cumulative greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that drive climate change, rather than the date on which we arrive at net zero. And so the sooner we cut them, the less we emit in total overall. And in case we needed reminding of why overshooting on total carbon emissions is a really bad idea, this week we have found ourselves in the midst of a severe regional rainfall event causing much disruption and flooding. And this is a predictable impact of climate change that we're expecting in this area, and it hurts all of us, our economy and our residents. Cabinet is asked today to recommend that the need for interim targets for operational and district emissions is reviewed as part of the development of the forthcoming corporate plan. And I'd just like to remind you all that on 17th of July, Council voted unanimously in support of a motion to ask Cabinet to consider the use of SMART targets, that is, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-bound targets to help us deliver and monitor our carbon emission reduction targets for council operations and the wider district. So I've come here today really to ask you to strengthen that recommendation that's in front of you on items 9 and 10 on interim targets. In the spirit of our recent motion, I'm asking you to accept that there will definitely be interim targets, and if necessary, a series of them to guide us towards net zero emissions for our own operations and for the district, and that what those targets are and making them as smart as possible will be reviewed as part of the development of the forthcoming corporate plan. If net zero was easy, we'd already be there. It's not like there are not strong enough reasons to do this. But it's not easy. So let's give ourselves the best possible tools to deliver this by using structured smart targets to help take us there. Because I do definitely believe that all of us on this council want to deliver this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. And I think that's a very timely discussion as you bring up the flooding. Obviously, we've all been affected by that over the last week, and we know some of our residents have been dramatically affected by that. And it is a sign of climate change and the worst aspects of that. And I am glad that you have reminded us about our commitment to smart targets, and you made reference to the corporate plan, which I think we'll probably be discussing later. So thank you very much. Did anybody have any questions or comments to direct towards Councillor James? Okay. Thank you, and thank you very much for joining us, Councillor James. Do we have Councillor Patel? Councillor Patel, are you available to? Ah, there you are.
Yes, my circumstances aren't the most convenient, but hopefully the internet connection holds up. But thanks for letting me speak. Firstly, I think I'm going to be probably. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, right. Firstly, I think I'm going to basically be echoing a lot of what Councillor Gascoigne and Councillor James have said, but I'll go through it anyway. In terms of council's operations and sort of trying to get us to net zero, congratulations, we've made a lot of progress, and it's been really good to see that. And I was very pleased to see that we'd set a very ambitious 75% target for 2025 and net zero by 2030. But as Councillor Gascoigne said, you know, without data there to back it up, we knew that a lot of this was going to be go as fast as we possibly can, and we'll see where we are. Having gone through the report to Cabinet, I'm actually really pleased about the openness and the transparency I see within it. Although it was not all good news, I believe to make progress, we need to be honest with everyone. The modelling in the report is much welcomed. It allows us to see how far we can go based on the path we have defined. We have 4 stages set out in front of us. I think we're quite far through the first one. The other 3 are sort of in the early stages in various points. But if all 4 of these were to come off as we expect, we would reach 47% by 2025 and of our 75% goal, and 89% against our net zero goal at 2030. From the report, it looks to me like our ability to meet these targets is critically dependent on being able to decarbonize our refuse fleet. So I was happy to see that we have secured the funding and have started the trial for the electric vehicles in September. I look forward to seeing the reports on how that goes. I have seen, however, that our current aim is to have low carbon vehicles as opposed to zero carbon, and our recently purchased diesel vehicles will continue in service beyond 2030. Both of these are limiting factors in our ability to reach net zero targets and any interim targets we choose to set. I also see that at present, our 4 trial company cars will be switched out to 2 EVs and 2 hybrids. I know that these decisions are being made for practical reasons, but we need to recognize that these compromises further limit us from reaching our goal. The report makes it clear that our 75% and net zero targets are ambitious, and further, our projections within the report are optimistic. That's sort of a bit of a double whammy there. We need to recognize that both of these factors, in addition to the various trials which in practice demonstrate we are needing to take steps backwards as well as forwards to ensure we can continue to provide the services our residents rely upon. We should further recognize that our ability to impact change may be hampered by factors outside of our control.
Well, you've gone on mute, Councillor Patel.
Oh, sorry. That's my finger. It's sort of wagging. I know that currently the cabinet is being asked to make one of three decisions. Sorry, you can hear me?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
I'm asking cabinet for now to forego dropping the current target and not to set a simplistic change to the existing target framework as we have it, and instead follow what we'd set out, much of what Councillor James has already said in July's council, of smart targets, sort of gradual and progressive, and this time use the data we've collected to base those targets upon. And that allows us to be a lot more realistic and also be honest about exactly where we think we're likely to get to. There is a lot here that we can impact, and there's a lot we can't. Is there a time limit in cabinet? I don't think I've ever spoken in cabinet before.
There isn't a specific time limit, but I think we're approaching the.
We are approaching 15 minutes.
Yeah, we are approaching the 15 minutes overall section timing.
Okay, I'll be fairly quick on the next bit. So I'm going to talk very briefly about district to net zero. So we also set targets for the district as a whole. Now, these we have to understand now are much softer. There are limited impacts we can make there. We do not have direct control over any of this. A lot of it is influence and small changes we can make to sort of encourage change. The report highlighted two of the largest contributors across our district are transport and domestic use. I believe we can impact both of these areas as a district council, a lot more than we think we can. As a largely rural district, it is more difficult to get people out of their cars. However, we can make it easier for residents to make better choices. Particularly, I'm kind of thinking those of us with better incomes, it's much easier for us. We have big driveways, we can put charging networks in. However, for those with lower incomes, with no driveways, who rely on street parking, this is much harder. So as a district, I'm actually quite pleased to see that we have put charging infrastructure in place, and we are, between both the Vale and the South, looking at rapid chargers in various locations. That's actually a good way for us to move forward. And I would like to see a lot more cheaper, low energy, low capacity chargers far more frequently in more of the built up areas as well as in rural areas, because that really does help a lot of people who have petrol and diesel cars but barely use them. But they can get shorter range ones to sort of meet their needs as long as there's charging infrastructure there. The second side on more to do with domestic usage, I think we can have a larger impact there than we believe. As a district council, planning policy kind of gives us a lot of control. I have stated my disappointment that we had to soften our targets in this area in the new local plan that we're pushing forward. I understand why. However, we have to recognize that national policy may be revised, and there may be opportunities for us to change that, and we should be looking at that all the way through. In terms of the options presented at present, I would like cabinet to hold off on this decision until we know a little bit more, because particularly over the next few months, likely things are going to change, and for us to simply change targets at this point and then have to change them again just doesn't seem very sensible at this point. That's it.
Thank you. There's a lot to unpack there, and as you appreciate, I probably don't have as much time as I could to sort of comment on everything. I did forget, I suppose, to thank Councillor James and yourself, Councillor Patel, for your congratulations that we have put this as a priority as a Liberal Democrat administration, and that we find that this is an incredibly important matter that we're considering today. I think it's important, and that to recognise as well that the scenarios put out in the report are hypothetical. They're not something that we are sort of considering to aim for as such, but they're there for our consideration. That's to my understanding. There's a lot, and as you know, we do not have that control of the district, but we do have district-wide emissions, but we do have means to affect those. And I think I must have been one of those low-income households, because I'm very much dependent on street parking with no driveway. So I am, if I ever do get an electric vehicle, which I very much hope to, I will probably be dependent on our car parking charging there. So does anybody have any comments or questions? Yeah.
It's just one question, Councillor Patel. I couldn't quite hear what you said about the interim operational net zero target. Did you say that you would like Cabinet to retain the existing one, or did you say that it should be reviewed, which I think was what Councillor James said?
I think right now I don't want to see the interim target dropped. I think we need to head towards the smart target. So in other words, making piecemeal change, then only have to change it again. I'd rather Cabinet spend a bit more time and Office spend a bit more time on defining the smart target framework, and then make the changes one step rather than drop it now and then come up with something else. Because that sort of sends mixed messages out saying, right, we're getting rid of this one because we can't meet it, and then later on we're bringing something else in. Does that make sense?
Okay. I understand what you're saying. Yes. Thank you.
And Councillor Fulton.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Patel, for your comments on joint local plan. I just wanted to clarify, our net zero buildings policy is still, I believe, the most advanced in the country that has been proposed in a local plan. The embodied carbon policy was groundbreaking. Nobody's tried to do it before, and I know our colleagues in South Oxfordshire will end up with a slightly more robust policy in that area. We had to back it off a little bit because of viability concerns, but it's still something nobody else has ever tried in the country. And we always knew that we were pushing the envelope with these policies. I'm very proud of them. I believe it is adding a huge amount to our whole district drive to net zero. And don't forget the retrofit policy. That is something I believe your group has been asking for regularly, and it's there in the joint local plan.
Councillor Forsham, I don't want it to sound very negative at all. I'm actually quite proud of quite a lot we've got in there. But if I wasn't disappointed as a Green about things that I really want to push a lot harder on, I kind of feel a bit odd about it. So take my disappointment with a pinch of salt.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Patel. And yes, and we are all very proud of what we've achieved through the joint local plan, and the targets and policies we've set there are groundbreaking, as Councillor Fulton has said. So thank you all who have addressed us in this section. Unfortunately, Councillor Foxhall is not able to make it for item number 7, recommendations from other committees. Can we review her? Could you?
So she's asked me to thank for the changes to the waste strategy following the July screening decision. So she just wanted to pass her thanks on for that.
Thank you. And no further comments?
No further comments.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think we are able now to go on to the more substantial part of the agenda, item number 8, which is the Vale Local Plan Part 2 review, and I believe that's going to be introduced by Councillor Fulton.
Indeed. Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, Cabinet. The Council has statutory duty to review Vale Whitehorse Local Plan 2031 Part 2. Local Plan Part 2 for its friends and the rest of this went. Within 5 years of its adoption, to decide if any revisions are necessary. This report brings this process to a conclusion and fulfills this obligation. The review of the Local Plan Part 2 policies indicates that some policies need to be updated. They're no longer effective and consistent with national policy. However, as outlined in the report, revising these policies now would take longer than progressing with the joint local plan. As we know, the JLP aims to develop a comprehensive set of up-to-date development policies to replace our existing local plans, including Local Plan Part 2. The joint local plan is currently at an advanced stage and is expected to be adopted by December 2025. But if the council were to initiate a separate revision process for Local Plan Part 2 policies, it's estimated that adoption would not occur until summer 2026. As an illustration of how many changes come in with our joint local plan, only 2 of the policies are being carried forward into the joint local plan, and 5 are being deleted, whereas 50 are being replaced. The report therefore recommends that Cabinet approves for publication the Regulation 10A review for the Vale of Whitehorse Local Plan 2031, Part 2. B, that the Council will not revise any Local Plan Part 2 policies, as the preparation of the joint local plan will enable Council to adopt replacement policies quicker than a formal review of the Local Plan 2031 Part 2. And C, to authorise the publishing of a formal statement confirming that the Vale of Whitehorse District Council has completed the Regulation 10A review of the Local Plan 2031 Part 2. Council can be satisfied that the recommended decision in the report complies with the legislative requirements and represents the most efficient course of action. Very happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. Sorry. I think what you said there about the number of policies that are being replaced are really telling, and echoes what you just said about how we should be proud of where we are going with the joint local plan, and how it's contrasted with the plan that's gone before it. So I would open it out to anybody who has any comments or questions to direct to Councillor Fulsham or officers. Oh, that's a new shot. Yes.
I think mine's just a very straightforward comment, which is, why would we do something which is counterintuitive?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I know.
Sorry to be so simplistic, and when something's quite a complicated, but it seems like a formality.
It is, yes, it is. And Councillor Fulsham has explained very well why we wouldn't be going down any other route, really. But yes, I think it is just something to note, and to note that going forward, we have set ourselves much higher standards, and that's a brilliant thing for our communities and residents. So if nobody else has any further comments, would you like to say anything further, Councillor Fulsham?
Just like to follow up, thanking Councillor Edwards for her point about, yes, we don't want to do something daft like review a policy when the review could only complete after we finished replacing those policies 6 months previously. I would like to add on that I know there were comments that came through from scrutiny committee on this, and I can confirm that written answers have gone back to each of the scrutiny committee members who raised them. Grateful for scrutiny doing a deep dive into this, and we had some very full answers back, partly in the meeting, partly from officers later on. So thank you.
Thank you. So we are being asked to accept the recommendations. Is that correct? And I'm taking it that we are happy to accept it.
Second, sorry, I'm sorry.
I'll propose it.
Councillor Edwards is seconding. So in light of that, we're all happy to accept the recommendations put before us.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. You've made things so much more formal. First proposals and seconded. Thank you very much. I have to get it. So we're on to item number 9, which is the first of 2 that I am presenting. And it is item number 9 is review of the 2030 operational net zero targets, and obviously we've just had several people join us to comment on that. So thank you again for joining us. My introduction is short. it's just outlining that in this report, we have set out our progress to date on the Council's operational carbon emissions. The report includes greenhouse gas emissions for 2023-24, and for the first time, we also present our projections of our possible position in 2025 and beyond. In the report, there are 4 scenarios, each one building on the previous one. Committed projects, potential future building projects, a potential solar farm to decarbonise electricity, and achieving a low carbon fleet. The report shows projections from 2025 to 2030. However, as set out in the report, we need to reiterate that not all projects have committed funding at this stage, and reaching our target will require us to move quickly to deliver the remaining projects. The scenarios officers have modelled are not firm proposals. Scenarios 2, 3, and 4 will require full business cases to be worked up and will require consideration as part of the budget process, including consideration of staff costs. The report we bring you today is a first attempt at modelling these scenarios. As a result of this work, we have commissioned an updated version of our modelling tool, so we hope to be able to increase our accuracy in the future and give a more up-to-date view. Officers propose to bring this report to you on an annual basis. The report recommends that we recognise the significant progress made and review the need for an interim target. So I would like to bring you back to the recommendations, which A, that Cabinet recognises significant progress made in reducing the Council's operational carbon emissions. These have reduced by 18% since the Council's Climate Action Plan baseline of 2019 to 2020, and by 49% since the greenhouse gas reporting commenced in 2009-10. And B, that need for an interim target is reviewed as part of the development of the forthcoming corporate plan. So with that, I will hand over for discussion and any questions or comments. Councillor Coleman.
So referring a little bit to one, this is all on the operational net zero, but also to Councillor Patel's point. You'll be aware that we've just introduced, or we are introducing a new waste collection and street cleansing strategy, and we also, prior to that, have agreed on a waste vehicle procurement strategy in terms of what vehicles do we need to replace, and then how do we replace them. So that's the key bit, I think, for Councillor Patel's point, where we effectively we contribute 50.9%, 50.09% of the carbon footprint through our waste collection vehicles. So in that vehicle strategy, quite rightly, it puts the operational requirements as being the highest requirement. And the reason for that is because it's a legal requirement for us to collect waste from residential properties or from residents. So we must always look to see how do we achieve that. We then look to see what are the options available to us in order to achieve it. And then we look at, okay, of those options, how can we reduce our carbon footprint? And I feel to some degree that I'm, if you like, the baddie in this cabinet, in terms of I'd love us to have that right down to zero, but if I'm honest, I blame it all on Councillor Crawford, because he won't allow me to have the millions of pounds that I require in order to do so. So we do need to be challenging to ourselves and also to officers to say, are we doing the very best we can to get to the carbon footprint? But in the same breath, we must also be looking at ensuring that we meet our operational requirement, i.e. to collect the waste in the first place.
Yes.
And the technology is the bit that we really need to be waiting for. However, technology has changed very quickly and exponentially. We might actually find in 2 years' time there's a really good technical solution to this. Thank you.
So neither you nor Councillor Crawford are the baddies of the
Thank you for noting that.
And yes, as you say, technology is moving on all the time, and yeah, we hope that something can be done, but at this stage, we cannot commit to.
We're making a contribution, and we've got our first electric food waste vehicle. I mean, on the positive side to that, okay, I'll give you the downside first of all. 20, I might have these figures slightly wrong, but they're in this ballpark. 26-ton diesel refuse collection vehicle, in the order of about £190,000. A 6.5-ton electric food waste collection vehicle, about £300,000, plus the infrastructure that's then required to support that. So the cost is really, really high. However, here's the positive. About 30,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent for the diesel food waste collection vehicle, and we think we could probably get about a 20-tonne saving by using an electric vehicle. In addition, and this needs to be part of what we do in the trials. At the moment, the current waste collection vehicle has to probably break off of the route to go and offload its waste. The electric vehicle crushes the contents, and therefore we probably can complete the whole round on one drive.
Yeah.
Therefore, we actually cut down on the number of miles that we're doing, and therefore it actually becomes a cost saving measure. Fingers crossed and touch wood and all those other things. So there is some good news there, but we just need to be a bit realistic about what we do. Food collection is a lot easier. We don't need quite so much as lift as we do to remove the full waste and recycling.
Thank you for that. I'm very.
Don will correct me if I've said anything wrong there.
So I'm very impressed, with your detailed knowledge, and the advantage. It reminds me of that. That's good. Councillor Crawford, and I think Councillor Edward and Councillor Paulson. Councillor Crawford.
As the baddie in the room,
The other side.
how isolated and received away from me. I just really wanted to understand a couple of things. I think we need to bear in mind this is a net zero target, not a zero target, it's a net zero target. And in that context, it's something I think I've asked before, and I'm not sure I fully understand. And I'll use an example, and hopefully officers can educate me. In a few years' time, all of our leisure centres will be generating electricity. There'll no doubt be times when that electricity won't be used by the leisure centre, but will be exported to the grid. Are we allowed, in any way, shape or form, to claim that export to the grid from our leisure centres as an offsetting to our net zero? Because it is net zero and not zero.
It's Heather.
Sorry, Heather, drop you in it there.
Hi, Heather.
Good morning, everybody. It's Heather Saunders, Corporate Energy Officer in the Climate Team. We understand that when we have renewable electricity generation, it comes with certificates, REGO certificates. And if we want to claim any exported electricity in offsetting, we have to go through a procedure of retiring the REGO certificates. So this is something we have not explored yet, because our solar panels that we have put in this year are on public conveniences, and really the scale is de minimis and doesn't merit such activity. But certainly with a leisure centre, it is something we could explore. We haven't explored it yet, but it is a technical possibility. Thanks.
Thank you. That answers your question.
It does to a certain extent, but and I understand what REGO certificates are and all the issues around that. But nonetheless, we're setting out our net zero target. Although there might be a governmental view of what net zero really is, if we are, because of whatever reduce, for example, our leisure centres, producing more than we're consuming, the fact that there are all these other rules around it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't take that into account. I think there's a difference between what we can do in the real world versus all the rules that are out there that say that you're net zero or not. So I think we can be sensible rather than dogmatic about the rules that exist, because it's our target and we ought to be determining how we measure it to a certain extent.
So it's kind of been having a clear understanding of how we define net zero. Yes, as per this target.
Yeah.
We need to define that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be interested to find out though that and I appreciate that at the moment we're talking relatively small scale, but we will have 3 leisure centres with quite a lot of generation capacity.
Yeah.
And I think it would be good to know that as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. Councillor Edwards.
I think first I wanted to comment on Councillor Crawford's point, and I think that's really important. I think we do need to showcase how we will measure what does that net zero to us look like. And to Councillor Gascoigne's point, when the target was first put in place, it wasn't based on any real world measurement process. And I think that based on what I know of measuring climate action and things like that, there is a real struggle for anybody to categorically know what the right or wrong measurement is. And I think I would agree with what Councillor Crawford said, that if we can determine what our calculations are and how we calculate that, then at least we've got a framework in order to be smart measuring against along the way. And as long as our residents can see that, then we're still being really transparent, which is what we're very good at, and that the target could remain in place. But my original point was, again, probably coming down to the who's the villain in the room. Well, climate change is the villain in the room, obviously. But I think councils across the board will always have a struggle between how can you go to net zero while not becoming bankrupt along the way. You can't put in X number of investment just to get to some target that is really important, but you've got to deliver it against what's available from a funding perspective and, as Councillor Coleman said, technology available. And there's lots of unknowns that we don't know what's going to happen in the next few years either. So as much as I welcome an interim target, I don't believe we should completely shy away from a target, because as long as we're reporting along the way, then I think our residents and we would be happy with that too. Because, again, solar panels on leisure centres, I know how much my house generates and how much will go back into the grid just from my house. So I think that if we put ourselves in a SWOT model, there's lots of opportunities in the opportunities box that we could explore along the way. That's my point.
It's putting back in, and I think Councillor James suggested this, that we concentrate on those smart targets that we talked about at an earlier council meeting, and that I think that is through these different measures and bringing them all together, that is how we're going to achieve that. So, and obviously I welcome the corporate plan, but I'm sure Councillor Fulsham has probably something to say, so I'll leave it to him. I think you were the next to speak. Councillor Fulsham.
Thank you, Jo. I'm really pleased to see this report. I think it's really, really good and detailed, and I'm delighted that it's now to be an annual report. Partly because we're committed to, in the new corporate plan process, come up with more quantitative reporting, more detail that will actually enable us to steer this course more closely. It was hearteningly realistic to hear Councillor Gascoigne talk about the early setting of these targets, as actually we're setting them as ambitious targets without really much in the way of statistics to base things on. And hats off to the team for the work they've done to get us to this point. And these reductions are extremely meaningful already. We can do better. We're going to do better. And we're going to have targets in place, smart targets. I would caution against sort of committing to sort of figures now, or we'll fall into the same trap of taking a punt in the air and saying, we'll go for this percentage by this point. Yes, we want annual reporting. We want to set ourselves targets, but we need to work with the teams to get something that we can deliver. But we'll get better navigation because we'll have that reporting coming through the corporate plan reports. And that's the way we'll steer it, because if you don't measure it, you can't control it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that is key, and this was reflected in the recommendations. It is that it's smart, continuous, it's annual reporting, to make sure that we're not setting an arbitrary figure into the future, but that, that we are progressing our measurements as we go forward. And I thank you also for highlighting not that it's just the work of one team, and obviously climate team, Dom and Heather have done a lot to get these reports together, but it's an action of all of the teams right across the council to deliver these reductions that we've seen already. Obviously, the waste vehicle, leisure facilities, they're all playing a major part in this. So thank you to all the teams, as well as Dom and Heather and everybody in the climate team.
Very much so.
Just before we actually go into whether we accept these recommendations, I just wondered whether it would be appropriate to make a slight change to recommendation B to include the reference to smart in there. I mean, I think inherently probably most of us believe that we would only pick a smart target, but actually I think if we made reference to smart, so I would propose something along the lines of that need for an interim smart target is reviewed as part of the development of the forthcoming corporate plan.
Yeah. What would be the mechanism?
I think I can just make a motion, can't I?
Yes.
Recommend that change. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So can I propose that as a motion?
Yes, as an amendment motion. Does anybody want to second
Yes,
that? Yeah. Councillor Crawford. So does everybody agree to Councillor Coleman's amendment to the second recommendation?
Agreed.
I think that's good, and it's very it's in the spirit of the agreement, the motion that we had in council in July. So thank you for that, and I hope Councillor James has acknowledged that we have sort of taken that on board as well. So thank you to all. So if nobody has any further comments, can we agree the recommendations that I read out earlier on page 96 with that slight amendment? With the slight amendment to recommendation B.
So we had. So you're proposing. I'll second it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We're all agreed.
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 Thank you. Thank you very much. See what's going on with the next item.
Someone else will steal my idea.
So on to the item number 10, which is the review of the district net zero carbon target, which I am also presenting. So just let me bear with me for a second. There we go. So the review of the district net zero target for Vale of Whitehorse. In 2019, Vale of Whitehorse declared a climate emergency. The Climate Emergency Advisory Committee recommended that Vale of Whitehorse should become a carbon neutral district by 2045, with a 75% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. This target was adopted by Cabinet in December 2019. The latest greenhouse gas emissions data published by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero shows that 851.3 kilotons of carbon dioxide were emitted from sources in Vale of Whitehorse during 2022. This is 33.8% lower than in 2008. Although good progress is being made, the Vale of Whitehorse interim target to reduce carbon emissions by 75% by 2030 is not going to be reached. The council is limited in its ability to meet target as a large proportion of district-wide emissions are outside of the council's influence. The council is committed to accelerating and supporting progress across the district and has invested significantly in building up the council's in-house capacity through the expansion of the climate and biodiversity team, as well as providing support to other organisations in the district to reduce their emissions, for example, through the Climate Action Fund grant scheme. The council is also working in partnership with other Oxfordshire local authorities and stakeholders to deliver the Oxfordshire Net Zero Map and Action Plan. The paper sets out 3 options for the council's district-wide net zero targets. Cabinet could choose to 1. Retain the current target, which is for Vale of White Horse to be a carbon neutral district by 2045, and to retain the interim target of a 75% reduction by 2030. 2. To align with the national target to be carbon neutral by 2050. Or 3. To retain the current target, which is for Vale of White Horse to be carbon neutral district by 2045, and review the need for an interim target as part of development of the forthcoming corporate plan. Office's recommendation is option 3, that the council should recommit to accelerating the decarbonisation of the district as fast as possible, whilst recognising that a significant proportion of the district-wide carbon emissions are not within the council's control. A 2045 target gives us a realistic net zero date to work towards, whilst still being challenging enough to drive rapid progress and demonstrating our ambitions for Vale of White Horse to be leading the way ahead of the national target. So, if I can take you to the recommendations, that A, the Cabinet reaffirms its commitment to accelerating progress towards achieving an ambitious 2045 target to be a net zero carbon district, and B, that the need for an interim target is reviewed as part of the development of the forthcoming corporate plan. Thank you. So, with those recommendations, I would open the discussion out for any further comments or questions. Councillor Pinghills.
Yeah, because there are areas that we have little or no influence, I think we need to emphasise the importance of working with other districts because of the sort of unintended consequences of their decisions and actions. Mm-hmm. And just to give you an example, as most of you probably know, I live next door to a bus stop, the main X3 bus into Oxford. And a few years ago, we had hybrid buses, which were nice and quiet and low emission when we stopped at the stops. Recently, funding has become available somehow for Oxford City to have a fleet of, or for the Oxford Bus Company to run a fleet of electric buses within Oxford City. And those are predominantly within the city, though we do have one that comes out on one of the Abingdon routes. Meanwhile, the bus company have found that the hybrid buses are unreliable and they've had to discontinue their use, and they just were breaking down too often. So as a consequence of those two things, instead of nice hybrid buses, we now have the old diesel buses on the X3 route and X2 route. And so whatever carbon emissions we were gaining through in our district through having the hybrid buses are now even worse because of the consequences of the electric buses in Oxford. So I think it just shows unintended consequences on from other districts.
Yeah, I think that highlights sort of the importance of working with other authorities, but also working with other organisations and businesses. And I don't know whether we have any capacity to influence the bus company's decisions, because that would be, I would say, largely down to the bus company, but that is the sort of thing that we could consider. So thank you for that. I think there's a lot of cross-border potential there. Any other comments or questions?
A comment back on that. If Oxford City has a clean air zone policy, which it does, and a low emission zone where you get charged for driving in it, hypothetically, long term, would districts be able to have a similar, not quite as harsh, so to speak? Because obviously on Hankster Pig Hills example, bus companies meeting the yes what a city has enforced, and is getting away with not having the same enforcement at a district level. What influence can we have over something like that in the long term?
I don't know. I mean, ideally, and I guess that would be down to county to prescribe areas where those low emission zones could be, and that would then, I guess, force both motorists and bus companies and the like to be forced to consider their carbon emissions more and the use of electric vehicles more. So that's where would you like to comment on that any further?
No, I mean, ultimately it would be a county decision. But it's something you could lobby county for, but we need to link into kind of our air quality strategy and plans as well. So it is a partnership thing. It's not something we could implement ourselves. Yeah, Paul.
So Neil.
Councillor Fawcett.
Thanks. I think Helen makes a very important point about the knock-on impact of decisions in one place that can have on what happens in another place. Hopefully, the decision on the in and around Oxford will have a long-term consequence of generally boosting the electric bus market, which is part of the point of it, that will eventually benefit everybody. So that the long-term knock-on should actually be to benefit everybody. Just for clarity, the Zebra scheme, as it's called, is a joint scheme between the county council, the bus companies, and the government, with each of them putting in a lot of money, several millions of pounds. So it does impact on primarily the city, but it also its routes that go out to other parts of the Vale, such as Botley. I think I'm right in saying, it will do when they're running again. Linton in Charwell and in South Oxfordshire and so on. But more particularly for Vale residents, it will also cover a lot of routes that the park and rides are using as part of the general approach of trying to speed up journeys and get people to switch out either completely out of their cars onto the buses or to only use their cars for part of the journey and then switch to a bus. So in that sense, it's probably helping. There'll be a positive knock-on. On the general point, I think the paper is extremely helpful. I think the comments that we heard from councillors at the start of the meeting were very constructive and helpful, and I'm very proud to be on a council where I think every single member of the council is strongly committed to taking action on climate change and getting to net zero as soon as is practical for the council. Obviously, the report highlights some of the challenges in the way of that, and I think the discussion has been very constructive that in moving forward, our aim is to continue in that direction as quickly and effectively as we can, but realistically having to take account of the quite constrained financial situation the council is in. So I think this is a good report. I think the recommendations, as they've now been put, are very helpful and positive, and if I was in the room I would stick my hand up to support them. But clearly there is now going to be another lot of work to be done to work out how we get to that overall target, within the constraints that we face. And as others have said, we now need to work out how to do that based on what we now know, a lot of which is stuff we didn't know when we started the process. But the ambition is the right one, and I'm personally very proud to be on the cabinet of a council that has it as a top priority.
Thank you, Councillor Fawcett. Councillor Thornton.
Yeah, so just picking up on the air quality action plan, the officers have worked really hard internally, but also with county, but also, as I put it, with national highways. So this isn't just something that's within the county. So things are not quite as easy as as we would like them to be. So we should always bear that in mind. And I think then things not being as easy as we'd like. We need to remember that Oxfordshire is very different depending on where you live. So for Oxford City, then I think that electric vehicle and low emission zones and even the 15-minute get on your bike and walk is great. But I have a very rural ward where it would be impractical to get public transport into every little village with sufficient frequency, even to enable people to then go to a hub like a park and ride. So I applaud the aim to reduce emissions, and I'm on side, but I do need to think we just, part of the smart is achievable and realistic.
Yeah.
And I think at the moment some of these aims sound really, really good, but I know I have a lot of residents in my ward who would say without their car they would not be able to go shopping, they would not be able to go to the medical centres. So it isn't as easy a problem to solve. And I think Councillor James said at the beginning, if it was that easy, we'd have done it already. I think so. That's a really important point.
Yes, I do think that's very important to highlight the achievable and realistic in as part of SMART.
Yeah.
So that I did hear one of my residents has just started a job in Burford and using an electric bike to get from Farrington to Burford. So that's quite impressive because it's an hour place. So I think that is highly unusual, I would say. Does anybody have any further comments or questions? Oh, I thought she might.
A small observation from me is that I completely acknowledge that we've got to engage in partnership, working with our neighbouring councils, our tier councils. We've also got to acknowledge there's a role of central government in that, and we have seen, particularly during the previous government, a marked taking the foot off the gas on climate change, backing away from requirements on gas boilers, biofuel boilers, internal combustion engines, and to my mind that was extremely regressive. It was not something that we'd ever signed to ourselves. And we can only hope the new government comes in with some more sensible and forward-thinking proposals. But we are a little bit at their mercy on a lot of this in terms of our district net zero targets, which is why I'm very keen that we retain the ability to work through our corporate plan to set any interim targets. We won't just say, government's change things, but we will carry on regardless of what we set initially. So I think that's why we need that flexibility within the corporate plan setting, because yes, we want to get there. We're determined to get there, but how we get there, bearing in mind changed national picture, is so much of an unknown at the moment. We can't make any. We don't want to write checks that we can't cash.
Thank you very much. So going on to the recommendations, any further comments about the recommendations?
So I think can I propose a change to B again to put smart interim target.
Proposed. Second. Oh. And all agreed? Agreed. So we're going on to the recommendations with the amendment to recommendation B. So can we all agree those recommendations with the amendment? And I'm asking for a seconder. Councillor Edwards, did you want to? Yeah. That's you start last time. So are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. And thank you very much to Officer. Thank you, Don, for being in the room, and Heather, and everybody else who has been involved in both preparing these reports and also working so hard to meet, help us get towards those targets. So very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going on to item number 11, which is the waste resources and street cleansing strategy.
That'd be me talking rubbish.
I think so.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. So the strategy in front of us for decision today, created jointly with South, is one which sets out the ambitions for the district in how we all want to manage household waste resources and the condition of our streets. As has been mentioned previously, it was reviewed by joint scrutiny, and I'm grateful for their comments, most of which are agreed, some of which will need more detailed consideration. And I'll just cite one example. For us to become a net zero council, I think we just need to understand what that means. So I thank scrutiny for those comments, and we will be looking into each one of them. We all know that we have a great record when it comes to recycling performance, and our waste service is considered good by residents, but the status quo cannot remain. Changes in legislation will impact what we collect. Financial and commercial pressures upon the council will mean we need to find more efficient and effective ways of working, and we need to tackle the climate emergency on which waste services have a significant impact. As I said, 50% contribution to the carbon footprint. We also know that street cleansing services need to evolve. Clearer information about who has responsibility for the different parts of the public domain, and more information about when things are happening. Therefore, this strategy sets out the direction of travel to take the district towards an improved future. The first key thing to focus on is the waste hierarchy. This is well established and shows that preventing waste is where everyone's focus should be. To do this will involve the public, retailers, partner organisations and the council working together, all playing their part. Where waste does arise, we need to increase the amount reused before it ends up in bins for the council to collect and recycle as much as possible. This strategy also recognises the key link between waste and street cleansing, with litter on our streets, roads and public spaces being a blight on our communities and the environment. We want to work with local stakeholders to find the best ways to keep streets clean and tidy, and the strategy sets the path for more communication and cooperation at a local level. The strategy clearly sets out 8 principles to work to, and the council will develop its future action plan around these. Actions for consideration include supporting more repair cafes and volunteer litter picking groups, increasing the different types of items we can recycle, having more direct influence on the provision of services, working with partners to improve the cleanliness of roads and streets, and taking firmer action against those that blight it and litter. But one key piece of work will be to communicate these messages loudly and repeatedly so that we can all work towards the kind of community we want to live in. I recommend this strategy is approved, accepting that any minor changes in the future will be delegated to the head of service to resolve in consultation with me. Officers from the waste team are available, so we have Paul Fielding and Scott Williams, who can answer any technical questions that I might not be able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. This is I really like this report, and the strategy itself, I think, has been very well put together with a lot of evidence. And I'd like to thank officers, but I would also like to thank you, Councillor Coleman, for being an ambassador for this. And you really are. You are so familiar with everything that has gone into this, and I think all the facts and figures related to both this report and other areas of the waste in a sort of broader sense. So it gives me a great discipline that you are so familiar with this and so supportive of the direction that we're heading, given that we will hopefully look at these recommendations in a few minutes. But first, are we going to have are there any comments or questions?
I just wanted to comment and I think it's a great report and strategy, and it's when I saw the list of all of the engagement levels that we've done is commendable. I think, my goodness, we couldn't have covered any more bases off, really, and I think that is fantastic to see. And then obviously out of that comes an incredibly good strategy, and I particularly like the reduce at the very top of where we're coming from with this as a council, particularly for younger generations as well. We certainly don't hear from the youth, I don't think, on how important it was as it was in our generation. So hopefully this can be the simple communication behind that can get through to the younger audiences that it's needed to be.
And given subject matter, it is a very attractively presented report. So it is very appealing. Councillor Fawcett, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think this is a really good report, and I support it fully. But the main downside for me is I think it is another example of how difficult central government can make it sometimes for councils like ours to do the right thing that we are ready and willing to do by prevaricating and changing their minds for so long and so often on what is one of our key functions.
Thank you. That is very true. We did have to wait for a very long time only to find out that I think what they recommended was pretty much what we were doing anyway.
So Councillor Fawcett stole my thunder really, is exactly what I was going to say. I know that officers found it extremely difficult to give us sensible advice because they were getting very mixed messages and late messages from government. I just really wanted to understand, we now have a new government, obviously, and whether or not we are expecting new announcements that will impact our strategy, creating more work and making life easier. Are there any noises coming out from anywhere that suggest that there will be any significant changes?
So my gut feeling is no, because we were actually already doing a lot of the things that the previous government introduced, for example, food waste collection, which will be mandated, and some of the other things what I'd like to see is being enhanced. So, for example, the deposit scheme, which at the moment excludes glass recovery.
That's my question, really. What are the noises?
So possibly, I think the problem with that, having lived in Germany for 3 years, where we lived with FANT, is the infrastructure that's required to support that. So, but I noticed Paul Fielding come up on screen, so he'll probably have more details. I know he's almost talking this daily.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've not got a huge amount to add because I wouldn't say there's been a lot that has come out from the government. If there's going to be anything, it's probably, like we've seen on a number of things, delays. So it's possible that some of the implementation dates that we originally were expecting for things like the deposit return scheme might get delayed, but I don't think we've got a sense that there's going to be a major shift from the things that were laid out in the previous government on this, but only time will tell.
Thank you, Paul. Any further questions or comments?
So before we go to the recommendations, perhaps I could just say one of the things that I think that we need to ensure the residents are aware of. We're performing really, really well in terms of recycling, and it's like 63%. We've been in the top 5 recycling authorities for the last 6 years, which is excellent. Part of that is because we have been recycling food waste, and we also do the garden waste scheme as well. But as other authorities will be mandated to do food, then our level of percentage above others is going to reduce. But actually, that doesn't bother me because that figure is not the figure that we should be focusing on. I would like to see our recycling figure go down. I also want to see our residual waste, the bit that goes in your black bin, to go down, because that then means that we're reusing or we're not accepting the waste in the first place. So, I'd like to put it on record to say, if recycling rate goes down and residual waste goes down, that would be a really good outcome from this strategy.
Great.
That's what we need to be doing.
And that's what I was expecting to hear. Because you have got that.
I'm predictable.
So you've got it. It is a key message, and I think it's great that we are so advanced at this point, and perhaps we could be an exemplar in the future for those councils that haven't yet achieved what.
One other observation, and it goes with the food recycling. So when the previous government introduced the mandate for authorities to collect food, with that went some funding. But because Vale and South were already collecting waste, we did not receive funding. And the officers, and I thank them for it, did write and say that actually this was unfair and we should have received some money. Unfortunately, that, well, I suppose unsurprisingly, that fell on deaf ears. But it's that sort of level of engagement that we have with government to ensure that we're in a good place. And so all those other schemes that come in, we will be holding the government, the new government, to account to say, that's fine, we do it, we welcome it, but we also need the funding to support it.
Yeah, very true. Thank you. So if we return to those recommendations, page 119, there were two recommendations to approve the joint waste resources and street cleansing strategy is attached in Appendix 1, and for the delegates to the head of housing and environment to make any minor changes to future versions of the strategy in consultation with the cabinet member for environmental services and waste. So is everybody happy with those recommendations?
I'll propose it.
And Councillor Paulson to second. Thank you. We're getting the hang of it. And everybody agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
So before we move on, Beth, can I just again record my thanks to the officers for all the work that's gone into this, and it's a considerable amount of work. So I thank them, but I also would like to thank members for their contribution through the fora that we've had, and also for those residents who are part of focus groups to help us develop our thinking. So I think that's really, really good. And as Councillor Edwards said, probably there aren't too many strategies that have had so much input from various sources. So, but thanks very much to the officers, and hopefully Suzanne will take that back to the team. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's echoed throughout cabinet. So thank you. And now we come on to our final agenda item. Item number 12, Didcot Technology Park Proposed Local Development Order. Now, Councillor Gover is with us online to introduce. I believe she cannot put the recommendations forward, but I can do that. And obviously she cannot vote on this either. So Councillor Gover, can you introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
We hope you're feeling better.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It was really unfortunate timing to get sick. Yes. So firstly, let me introduce LDO definition. So that's an order that will grant planning permission for specific types of development. So just in this case, it's employment generating uses and within a defined area. Didcot Technology Park lies within the Didcot Growth Accelerator Enterprise Zone and Didcot Garden Town Master Plan, where it's identified as potential employment site. That will help to generate some of the 20,000 new jobs in the area by 2031. Enterprise zone status means that the business rates gross income earned on that site ahead of 31st of March 2041 will be retained locally and can be spent on local economic priorities. And economic development have indicated that the business rates are forecast to generate approximately 6 million per annum once the site is fully developed. So that's presumably, just hopefully going to be really, really good, just add up to our budget. Public consultation took place in 2022 on the local development order draft, and the responses to the consultations attached in the Appendix 2. So the draft has been further redefined to address the comments received and to promote active travel measures, including requirements for the provision of cycle parking close to the entrance of the buildings. A copy of the LDO with this appendix it's in Appendix 3. So if adopted, the LDO will permit the following: up to 115,000 square meters of commercial floor space, which would comprise a mix of any of the following uses: use class B2, general industrial, up to 5,000 square meters, Class B8 data center only up to 110,000 square meters, Class B8 battery storage only up to 20,000 square meters. So the LDO will expire on the 1st of January 2042, which is much in 25-year period of the DITCAT Growth Accelerator Enterprise Zone. The LDO is to be reviewed every 5 years, and in accordance with the sections 61A of the Town and Country Planning Act, the Council could seek to revoke the LDO at any time. The LDO is also supported by a statement of reasons, that's Appendix D of the attached LDO draft, which assesses the LDO proposals against the adopted development plan policies and other planning material considerations. The LDO is considered development plan compliant. A Section 106 agreement will secure highway mitigation, seeking to minimize traffic congestion on the local network, encourage sustainable travel by public transport, walking and cycling. So the developer contribution shown in the paragraph 9 of the cabinet report, but I can briefly give the number. So financial contribution towards HIF 1 road and bridges scheme, it's around 473K. Financial contribution towards public transport service improvement, 162K. Financial contribution towards public transport infrastructure, such as the bus stops and real-time information, 61K. To show the commitment to sustainable travel, LDO limits car parking to the 1 space per 68 square meters for light industrial and 1 space per 450 square meters for the data center, which reduced the parking provision by up to 50% from the adopted OCC parking standards. So subject to securing legal agreement under Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, the order can proceed to adoption. So, and I'd like to thank you all the officers who are working on this LDO, and, you know, just welcome any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gova. I will just go over the recommendations here. So just to be clear, the recommendation, Cabinet is asked to recommend to Council that the Didcot Technology Park Local Development Order, LDO, attached at Appendix 3 to this report is adopted subject to completion of a legal agreement securing the elements referred to in paragraph 9. So with that recommendation out there, I would like to put it out for comments or questions.
So can I just ask a question? Oh, I think, sorry, I think I may have had my hand up before you, Neil, sorry. In paragraph 27, can I just get some clarification on? So this is where it talks about the measures that to be considered, i.e. in reducing carbon footprint, use of air source heat pumps, ground source, wind turbines, solar thermal, etc. So can I just understand what that means when we say consider? Is that going to be something that we have as a mandate within the planning conditions based on LDO? So when someone puts a building up, that they will have to factor in putting solar panels on the top of a gymnasium, for example, if that's what they chose to put for their workers. What do we mean by measures to be considered?
Oh, that's on.
Paula, could you possibly good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come back on this question. Yes, to reassure you, an LDO is effectively like a large planning permission and sets out a range of conditions that any development has to follow. And as and when we would get a notification that somebody wishes to carry out development in that area, it will be explained to them, if it's not already obvious, that the conditions of the LDO relevant to that size of development that's being proposed will effectively kick in. So I can assure members that that will all be effectively covered in the order.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Fawcett, then Councillor Crawford, I think. Sorry, I don't know who's Councillor Fawcett.
Thanks. So I I really just wanted to comment that I'm pleased to see that quite a number of improvements have been made to this document since we discussed it what seems like months and months and months ago, maybe longer. But I'm pleased to see that various things, like for example the provision of cycle parking, has been improved. There's very clear plan now for how pedestrian and cycle routes, existing pedestrian and cycle routes, can be linked to this site, and there's provision in the LDO to make sure that in some cases they are delivered as part of the plan, and in other cases the land is safeguarded to add in other connectivity later for active travel. My personal view is that I think any major development like this still is a bit too biased towards car parking spaces and not enough towards active travel, but this is definitely a step forward from when we saw the initial ideas many months ago. The same applies to the landscaping and the number of trees and nature areas and so on. So on that basis, I think this is a pretty good proposal to go ahead with. And then, as others have said, there will undoubtedly be more detail that may be tightened up later. I guess the real challenge is that this site is predicated on the HIF1 road scheme going through, and that's mentioned in the detail of the documents. And that may be a challenge if that scheme, whether or not that scheme does go ahead. We don't know that for certain yet, and how long it takes if it does go ahead, and that obviously will impact on this development. But that is taken account of in the plans.
Thank you, Councillor Fawcett. Yeah, I think this has improved a lot, and it's really gratifying to see all the environmental considerations put into the plan, car parking reductions and active travel, and as you say, green spaces and that sort of thing. So thank you. Councillor Crawford or Councillor Fawcett? I don't know. Councillor Crawford.
Yeah. Giving way to age, aren't you? Can I just talk about paragraph 19? I've got a question really. As you'd expect, I'm really pleased to see that the development in the enterprise zone will generate business rates growth, and even more pleased that that growth income will be retained. But it then goes on to say and can be invested in the local area. I can't remember whether or not this area is within the area which is now effectively managed by Oxford. And obviously, Oxford have had quite a change in their structure and areas of responsibility. I just wanted to get some comfort, though, that retained business rates growth, when and if it materialises, will be invested in the local area rather than being spent on projects elsewhere.
Simon might be the best to. Simon? Simon, do you think you can answer?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm just trying to remember if this is Enterprise Zone 1 or 2, because certainly Enterprise Zone 1, there's already been decisions taken about spend, and not all of that spend was in the Vale area, although it improves the road network around the Vale area. So, but Enterprise Zone 2, no spending commitments have been made to date, but the original MOU was very clear that Enterprise Zone 2 monies had to be spent initially to support the local area. Clearly, decisions on spending of that money is a decision for the LEP board, and obviously we have representation on the LEP board. But as it stands at the moment, as I said, I can't. It might depend on which area it is, and I'll just if there are any other questions, I'll just have a quick double check, see if I can find out what area it is in, and then I might be able to answer more definitively.
Thank you, Simon. There were other questions. Councillor Fawcett? Caution, sorry.
That's right. Partly it's an observation that having spent a little while recently, heavily engaged in our joint local plan, to say how much this is so much one of the building blocks. It strengthens and encourages development in an area that is so close to existing successful enterprise zone, and indeed we all know that the Milton Park campus, we know how successful that is, how it attracts national and international businesses, and it's also right cheek by jowl with a major centre of population for the Vale in Didcot and surrounding Great Western Park and other areas. But it's developing it in a way that fits with our principles of trying to reduce dependence on cars, active travel's at the forefront, natural environment is actually protected and enhanced. I'm very excited and heartened to see this coming through. It's putting the meat on the bones of our policies. It shows what we think this sort of development should be like. The team need to be commended for it. So I'm very enthused by it.
Thank you. Oh, I can see Simon's got his hand up again, so I think he's come back with an answer.
Yeah. So
Thanks,
having looked at the map, it's in Enterprise Zone 2. Which means that as it stands at the moment, no funding decisions have been made about what EZ2 money will be spent on. But as per the MOU, it was for the spending would be on local infrastructure as the first priority.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Any further comments or questions? Nothing, but I do agree with Councillor Fulton. Sorry, the two F's, it's confusing. And others that this does fit in very well with what we are trying to achieve with our local plan and other local development orders that have gone in the past. So I am very happy with this report and happy to propose a recommendation. And I would ask for a seconder. Councillor Fulton is happy to second, and I would ask if everybody is happy, therefore, to accept the recommendations. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. And so I believe that is the end of the business today. I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us online, officers and members alike, and everybody who has contributed today to these reports and discussions about that. Thank you very much and enjoy your weekend when it comes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you. I hope you're feeling better.